This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for this first edition of CBN NewsWatch. I am Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the death toll keeps climbing in California as massive wildfires are still raging on both ends of the state, with 150,000 people displaced throughout. And the battle over the ballot in Florida as key races there are headed for recounts amid partisan attacks between campaigns and questions about the recount process, plus more violence in the Gaza Strip as Hamas fires another rocket barrage into Israel, and a call to rebuild an important part of our heritage, houses of worship. All those stories and more in this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. We want to begin, though, in California, where firefighters are battling raging wildfires, including one that has now matched the deadliest fire in the state's history. It was already the most destructive ever in California. The death toll from the fires has grown to more than 30. Our Mark Martin is on this story.
The fire in Northern California is known as the Camp Fire. It's left massive destruction about 100 miles north of Sacramento.
They're all around me. What do you mean? There is nothing left.
The Camp Fire has burned more than 100,000 acres and destroyed thousands of homes and buildings.
There ain't nothing to go back to. We're basically homeless right now.
Take a look at the town of Paradise, California. Burned out vehicles are on the roads and the local hospital is destroyed. Governor Jerry Brown is calling for a major disaster declaration.
This is not the new normal. This is the new abnormal. And this new abnormal will continue, certainly in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years.
As thousands evacuated, more than 200 people remain missing. Meanwhile, the Woolsey fire in Southern California rages on, leading to mandatory evacuations for 250,000 people. That includes all of Malibu. The wildfire leveled multi-million-dollar homes.
Do not return to your homes. The evacuation zones have not been rendered clear or safe by first responders.
Some of the thousands of firefighters battling the Southern fire have called it a hurricane of fire. They've already been fighting the flames for days and are preparing for the situation to get worse. Mark Martin, CBN News.
For most of the United States, the midterm elections have come and gone, but in a few states, they are far from over. In Georgia, Democratic candidate Stacey Abrams, who's trailing in the vote count, has filed a lawsuit to try and force a recount. Republican Brian Kemp there, though, has already declared victory. In Florida, the battle for the ballot is getting downright ugly.
Bill Nelson's a sore loser. He's been in politics way too long, 42 years. He just won't give up.
The state is in the midst of a bitter recount in key races, including the election for governor and the Senate race between Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson and his challenger, current Republican Governor Rick Scott, who has a lead that's shrinking. The recount comes amidst ongoing questions about the vote count in two key counties, Broward County and Palm Beach County, with Democrats saying they want all the votes counted and Republican critics saying the counties are violating state law. Our Washington correspondent Amber Strong joins us now with more on this. So, Amber, what's going to happen in Florida?
It's been a wild ride so far, and if Florida history is any indication, it's going to continue this way. So Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott seem destined for victory, and then this huge surge of votes come in late from Broward County and Palm Beach County. And now the GOP is asking, where are these votes coming from? So they're trying to figure out that part, and in doing so, filed a lawsuit saying we need to know more, and the states agreed with them over the weekend, saying that, yes, improper action had taken place in Broward County and in Palm Beach County.
Now, how are both sides responding to all of this?
Democrats say this isn't fraud. They even, the GOP gubernatorial candidate, Andrew Gillum, even went as far as to say this is another attempt at voter disenfranchisement. This is another attempt to squash your vote and to squash your voice. That it isn't fraud to count every single vote. They also point to the fact that the Florida Department of State is yet to receive any credible allegations. So they're saying if a crime took place, where's the charge? On the flip side, Governor Scott says, I am not ending here. He's filed 2 more motions to seize the ballot boxes to make sure there's no funny business when the ballot boxes aren't in use. And then in his messaging, he says, I'm going forward. We won, and we're moving on to Washington.
All right, this will be one to watch indeed. Amber Strong reporting for us from Washington. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's a quick look now at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. UK employees may be next in line to have microchips implanted in them. The London Guardian reports Britain's biggest employer and main trade union have sound the alarm over implanting the chips to improve safety. The tiny chips implanted in the flesh between the thumb and forefinger would enable people to open their front door, access their office, or start their car with a wave of their hand, and can also store medical data. But the trades union Congress worries the chips could be used to micromanage employees and cut back on their right to privacy. President Donald Trump joined French President Emmanuel Macron and dozens of other world leaders Sunday to mark 100 years since the end of World War I. More than 66 leaders gathered in Paris for the occasion. President Trump also visited and delivered Veterans Day remarks at the Chournes American Cemetery and Memorial outside Paris, where more than 1,500 Americans who died were buried. He also later attended a leaders' lunch hosted by Macron. Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church in California is recovering after having an emergency surgery. Warren was hospitalized Thursday and underwent immediate surgery from an intestinal condition. In an email sent to church members, Warren thanked everyone for their prayers and said, "God has been good to me." Warren also said he will need a second surgery after Christmas. You can find more on these stories and others throughout the day, always at cbnnews.com. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cut short his visit to the World War I memorial ceremonies in Paris to address the deteriorating situation in the Gaza Strip. As Chris Mitchell reports now from Jerusalem, some see the border on a knife's edge between calm and a full-scale war.
Officials closed schools next to the border after Hamas fired 17 rockets into Israel. The rocket barrage followed a firefight between IDF Special Forces and Hamas inside Gaza. One Israeli officer was killed, another severely wounded, while 7 Palestinians died in the assault, including 2 senior Hamas commanders. The IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, called the battle a very meaningful operation to Israel's security. While in Paris, Netanyahu said there was no possibility of a peace deal with Hamas and compared an agreement with Hamas to one with ISIS.
There is no political solution for Gaza. I do not have a political solution with the Islamic State. I don't have a solution for Iran, as long as it declares it wants to destroy us. There is no such political solution.
Netanyahu added, Israel is the finger in the dike for Europe.
Israel is Europe's shield in the Middle East. It is as simple as that. If we were not here, then radical Islam would spread. We would do it first and foremost for our own protection. I do not want to mislead you, but when we defend ourselves, we also defend Europe, and I expect a change in Europe's approach towards us.
Netanyahu said he wants to avoid a needless war and even facilitated a transfer of $15 million from Qatar to pay civil servant salaries in Gaza. While the ongoing fighting threatens to erupt into a full-scale war, the UN and Egypt are trying to broker a ceasefire. Their attempt follows months of Hamas-led riots on the Gaza border, arson balloons that have burned thousands of acres, and a recent infiltrator that set fire to this greenhouse. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, the movie issues a call to young people to restore an important part of the world's heritage, houses of worship. We're going to have a look at the movie and a conversation with the filmmaker behind it when we come back. Restoring Tomorrow is a film about faith, family, and renewal, as well as hope. It is a call to action to restore houses of worship, and it's in limited release. But the actor and director who produced it says it has a critical message for his generation to come back to places that matter. Here's a look at the film.
Hit me like a wall of cold water. I thought to myself, we're dying at the roots here. This campus is dying.
I used to go all the time to the temple with my family, and it seemed to be so relevant to them and to my grandparents. Something's different now. I don't know if it's a generational thing or what. I don't know if I get it.
No one has a sanctuary like that. But look around. Pieces of the dome are falling. Literally 10-pound pieces of plaster falling down. They're lethal. The physical plant was an embarrassment.
What happened physically with the temple was a powerful metaphor. It was falling apart.
And that's where I have, in this process, felt guilty because I took it for granted.
A place like the temple is trying to connect us with things of real meaning.
The Warner Brothers were willing to support whatever he was going to do, and that included building this temple.
How do you feel about what has happened and what is to come?
A little earlier, I spoke with the filmmaker behind Restoring Tomorrow, Aaron Wolf. Here's a look at that interview. So briefly, share the story behind Wilshire Boulevard Temple's history and its falling apart.
Yeah, Wilshire Boulevard Temple is the oldest congregation in Los Angeles. When it started, Los Angeles had 5,000 people. That's it.
Wow.
Abraham Lincoln was president. And I learned all this going through this journey making Restoring Tomorrow.
Yeah.
It is the oldest congregation. My grandfather was a rabbi there for 50 years. He came from Nazi Germany. He escaped and he studied to be a rabbi, and his number one outreach and way of reaching out to the community was interfaith. And so Wilshire Boulevard Temple has been a temple that has stood for interfaith for its entirety. My grandfather, that was his message. And unfortunately, it was falling apart. Like a lot of institutions right now, it was in disarray. And they led a campaign to restore it. And I think it symbolizes what Wilshire Boulevard Temple and Restoring Tomorrow symbolize is what any community can do when they rally together with faith and with their families so that they can provide a better future for their community, because these places are what do good in communities.
In the little bit that we've been able to see of the film, we see that this is a very personal project for you. What is it that drove it to be so personal for you?
It's been personal from minute one. I went through a bump in the road where I was supposed to get married. The wedding got called off 1 month before. And so I started this project, and it started with just me doing a little bit of chronicling of what they were trying to do per my rabbi. And then it became something so much bigger. I started to feel my own faith. I started to learn about my own family. And so I turned the camera on me and said, I think I'm serving as a microcosm for what could happen to any young person disconnected to their religious institution who needs to come back to it. And I think right now in 2018, with all that's going on, the shootings in Pittsburgh and in LA, and what this idea of us being able, now I know why I did it. It's this Tuesday, November 13th, the idea of getting people all around the country to theaters nationwide in one place for hope, to stop the hate and start the hope. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, you mentioned the shooting, and we had one in California, the synagogue shooting, of course. Do you think, I mean, I imagine this is timely, and some people would probably wonder, how can I look back at history in order to repair what we're going through right now? What would you say?
I would say there's two pieces. The first piece is, as we say in the film, we are the ancestors for future generations. So how do we want them to look back at us? And my recommendation and what the film provides is hope. And the reason is I recommend we stop pointing fingers and start opening out our hands. And the more we can do that, and in the film, I think you'll be surprised with the ending. I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but it offers that hope. And then you feel, when the moment we feel good again, then the hate can stop and people can look back on us in 2018 and say, they were good ancestors.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, in terms of extending a hand, you're using this film to extend a hand as well. Share what's going to happen as a result.
Yes, so on Tuesday, we're doing this, we're showing the film, then we're having a conversation with the most unlikely, notable people that you would expect to be in the same room, having a conversation together about unity, about comfort, about family. And the idea is that this Restoring Tomorrow movement, I made a movie. But now it's for everyone. And it's for, I hope, families to come with their grandparents, to come with their parents, to come with their kids. I don't have kids yet, so I can't bring my kids because I don't have any, but I would if I could.
Yeah.
And to go as a family, because then you'll come out on Tuesday and you'll feel good again. And I encourage anyone to write me. I'm the Aaron Wolf on social media, or go to the Restoring Tomorrow website or Howling Wolf website. It's through Fathom, and you can get tickets and then come as a community, because it's all about community.
Restoring Tomorrow is in theaters for one night only, as you heard, tomorrow night, Tuesday, November 13th. You can visit cbn.com for more information and to find a connection to a theater near you. Coming up, CBN Superbook is now on the air in Japan, and recently the show took center stage at a major evangelistic event in that country for both children and their families. We're going to have that story when we come back. In its second month on Japanese television, Superbook is getting more popular, and just a few days ago it took center stage in the largest evangelistic event for children and their families in Japan. Lucille Toulousan brings us this story from Tokyo.
This is known as the Joy Joy Festival. It's Japan's largest annual evangelistic event, organized by 88 churches and the Word of Life Press Ministries, which is Superbook's ministry partner here. 2,000 kids and their families attended, and half of them are not part of any church. Churchgoers grabbed this opportunity to invite non-Christians to the concert, not only for entertainment, but to hear the good news about God's love. A special attraction this year was Superbook's Gizmo, or Robic, as he is known in Japan. The audience got even more excited when they received Superbook DVD sets.
Gizmo is very happy meeting new friends here at the Joy Joy Festival, where Superbook has also participated. This is a great way to promote Superbook that now airs on national television here in Japan.
John Tan, CBN Regional Director for Japan, describes the airing of Superbook as a miracle and a great favor from God.
The words impossible were told to us to get it on air. After the Tokyo gas attack by a cult, there was a lot of confusion as to what Christianity or other religions really stand for. So there was a difficulty to get religious or Christian material on air. But seeing Superbook, the quality of animation, and it helps children, so then they've allowed us to be on air.
The people don't know the whole story of the Bible, and they are looking forward to listen to each of the story every week.
In addition to watching Superbook on television, churches are using the animated Bible series as part of their Sunday school curriculum.
One of the big issues for the youth is they don't have hope. They don't know what to do with the future. But we know the church has the real hope in Christ. So it's very important for us Christians to reach out to them to tell them the real hope they can have. This way, Superbook can be used effectively.
The lesson I learned from Superbook is to put Jesus first in everything I do.
I love the part of the resurrection after Jesus died on the cross, because Jesus is the one who forgave our sins and died on the cross. I invite my friends to our home to watch Superbook. I hope they tell their mothers about Superbook so they can get to know Jesus.
Lucille Toulousan, CBN News, Tokyo.
Still ahead, we're giving you a look at a special program on the CBN News channel today. It's in honor of Veterans Day. You don't want to miss it. We'll have the story right after this. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. Today is Veterans Day, and of course that journey is one that begins for them in boot camp today. Here on the CBN News channel, you can follow the stories of 4 young recruits as they undergo training to become sailors in the United States Navy. So be sure to stay tuned throughout the day for the Veterans Day documentary, Making of a Sailor. It's going to air at 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 9 p.m. It's a show you don't want to miss. Right now, it is time for your Monday Motivation, and today I want to leave you with this message. In God, there is no failure. Your failures are actually only lessons that will lead to blessings. So don't look at anything you've done as a failure. It's only a lesson to lead you closer to where you're supposed to be. With that word, make this a marvelous Monday. That is going to do it for this half hour of the CBN News Watch. Our second half hour is coming up for those of you watching right here on the CBN News Channel. And today we'll have an interview with Charlotte Pence, Vice President Pence's daughter. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a marvelous Monday, everybody.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Efrem Graham. For most of the country, the midterm elections have come and gone. But in a few states, they are far from over. In Georgia, Democratic candidate Stacey Abrams, who's trailing in the vote count, has filed a lawsuit to try to force a recount. Republican Brian Kemp has also declared victory. And in Florida, the battle for the ballot is getting downright ugly.
Bill Nelson's a sore loser. He's been in politics way too long, 42 years. He just won't give up.
Florida is in the midst of a bitter recount in key races, including the election for governor and the Senate race between Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson and his challenger, current Republican Governor Rick Scott, who has a lead that's shrinking. The recount comes amidst ongoing questions about the vote counting in two key states, Broward County and Palm Beach County, with Democrats saying they want all the votes counted, and Republican critics saying the counties are violating state law. Firefighters continue to battle raging wildfires in California, including one that has now matched the deadliest fire in the state's history and was already the most destructive in California history. It's known as the Camp Fire, and it's burned more than 100,000 acres and destroyed thousands of homes and buildings. The death toll from the fire has grown to more than 30. Governor Jerry Brown is calling for a major disaster declaration.
This is not the new normal. This is the new abnormal. And this new abnormal will continue, certainly in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years.
Meanwhile, the Woolsey fire in Southern California has led to mandatory evacuations for 250,000 people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cut short his visit to the World War I memorial ceremonies in Paris to address the deteriorating situation in the Gaza Strip. His departure came after Hamas fired 17 rockets into Israel. The rocket barrage followed a firefight between an IDF Special Forces unit and Hamas inside Gaza. One IDF officer died and another was severely wounded, while 7 Palestinians died in the assault, including 2 senior Hamas leaders. While in Paris, Netanyahu said there was no possibility of a peaceful deal with Hamas and compared an agreement with Hamas to one with ISIS.
There is no political solution for Gaza. I do not have a political solution with the Islamic State. I don't have a solution for Iran, as long as it declares it wants to destroy us. There is no such political solution.
While the ongoing fighting threatens to erupt into a full-scale war, the UN and Egypt are trying to broker a ceasefire. The caravan of several thousand Central American migrants resumed their march to the United States border this weekend. The group of about 4,000 was in Mexico City, but are quickly making their way to the border city of Tijuana. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is deploying more than 7,000 military troops to help to deal with the flood of asylum seekers in their ranks. CBN News contributor Chuck Holton joins us now from El Paso with more. Chuck?
Okay, so this is downtown El Paso. We're right on the border fence here. That's Juarez, Mexico, across the Rio Grande there. You can see the river is very shallow right now. You can walk right across it very easily, and many people do. They do that in this area a lot because this fence is what they call the old tortilla curtain. It's so easy to breach in today's environment that it needs to be replaced, and that's actually exactly what they're doing. If you look over here to my right, you can see some construction going on. That's them in the process of installing new and much more substantial fence, but that's not part of Trump's border wall. The reason that they're putting this in now is because this area has become really, really busy with migrants crossing illegally, and when they do that, it's extremely expensive for the American taxpayer.
That's CBN News contributor Chuck Holton. Thank you so much. President Trump has said anyone entering the country illegally will no longer be eligible for asylum. Time now to take a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. UK employees may be the next in line to have microchips implanted in them. The Guardian reports Britain's biggest employer and main trade union say the microchips would help to improve safety. The tiny chips implanted between the flesh between the thumb and finger would enable people to open their front door, access their office, or start their car with a simple wave of the hand, and can also store medical data. UK firm Biotech has already fitted 150 implants to businesses and individuals. President Donald Trump joined French President Emmanuel Macron and dozens of other world leaders Sunday to mark 100 years since the end of World War I. More than 66 leaders gathered in Paris for the occasion. President Trump also visited and delivered Veterans Day remarks at the American Cemetery and Memorial outside Paris, where more than 1,500 Americans who died during the war are buried. He also later attended a leaders' brunch hosted by Macron. Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church in California is recovering after having an emergency surgery. Warren was hospitalized Thursday and underwent immediate surgery from an intestinal condition. In an email sent to church members, Warren thanked everyone for their prayers and said, "God has been good to me." Warren also said he will need a second surgery that's going to come after Christmas. Now you can find more on these stories and others throughout the day at cbnnews.com. Coming up, it is a church that sits on the borders of two warring communities, and its members include fighters from both sides of the battle. Hear how this Belfast church is bringing two communities together when we come back. Today, nations around the globe are commemorating the end of World War I, and in the city of Israel, in the city of Beersheba, it is no different. Last year, the city marked the 100th anniversary of an epic battle during the Great War. It was a conflict that gave Great Britain control of the city, and the anniversary is still very important because that victory helped to set the stage for the establishment of modern Israel.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the Australian Prime Minister and New Zealand Governor to commemorate the victory of British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers and the Light Horse Regiment a century ago.
Nearly 4,000 years ago, Abraham came to Beersheba, the city of seven wells. Exactly 100 years ago, brave Anzac soldiers liberated Beersheba for the sons and daughters of Abraham and opened the gateway for the Jewish people to re-enter the stage of history.
And they spurred their horses through that fire, those mad Australians, through that fire, and took the town of Beersheba, secured the victory that did not create the state of Israel, but enabled its creation.
The Battle for Beersheba was a turning point in the British conquest of the Middle East. That enabled British General Allenby to walk through the Jaffa Gate here less than 3 months later, on December 11, 1917, as the victor in the Battle for Jerusalem. Allenby, the first Christian conqueror in centuries, entered the gate on foot out of respect for the Holy City. Australian light horsemen made that possible.
The charge of the Australian Light Horse was significant because they were never trained to do this. They were what we call mounted infantry. They go up to the front line on horse, get off, and go in as infantry. So this was something completely new. They'd never trained for it. And so upwards of 600 of these men, they just were given the order and they did it.
Australian author Calvin Crombie teamed up with the director of the Australian Light Horse Association, Barry Waters, to spearhead the efforts to reenact the charge. More than 100 uniformed horsemen rode in the event.
Whoa! March! They had to get into Beersheba before the sun went down because the Turks were beginning to destroy the water wells.
It was important in geopolitical terms because it was the action that broke the back of the Ottoman Turkish Empire.
At the same time, a monumental decision was being made in Britain.
What's so amazing is that on the same day, at about the same time as this event took place, the members of the British War Cabinet were meeting in London and they voted for that great decision, which we now know as the Balfour Declaration, that the British government views would favour the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Australians and New Zealanders are extremely proud of their role in Middle East history, like Australian Lance Corporal David Wood.
My great-grandfather was a member of the 1st Light Horse Regiment who held the back door open and stopped off the Turkish retreats.
It was his first trip to Israel, the country his great-grandfather Alfred had unknowingly fought for.
You feel proud and you feel a bit overwhelmed to be around and to have been at the cemetery this morning and seen all the gravestones of my great-grandfather's mates is amazing and humbling.
Earlier in the day, those celebrating watched the Light Horseman Parade down Beersheba's main street.
To be here at the place where the Australian victory occurred, and it was an incredibly gutsy effort, both men and horses.
It's all part of our national psyche.
I think it's another display of his awesomeness and how history is made with him in this scenario, and God being God and who he is and everything that he represents. Yeah, we get to be a part of it being Aussies.
Australia's Prime Minister summed up the part his countrymen had played.
They defied history, they made history, and with their courage, they fulfilled history.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
It's been 20 years since Catholics and Protestants ended their war in Northern Ireland. Even though they've left the troubles behind them, peace between the two communities remains elusive. Adair Hurd brings us the latest from Belfast.
There is peace in Belfast, officially. But this wall still separates Catholics and Protestants, and this gate still closes every night. New Life City Church sits squarely on Belfast's so-called peace barrier. Part of its building in Catholic Belfast, part of it in Protestant Belfast. It welcomes those who were once mortal enemies.
Among those that come to our church regularly, Sunday after Sunday, are those who are from terrorist backgrounds who at one time would have wanted to have killed each other. There was a time whenever I would have killed some of them.
Jack McKee was a soldier during the war and today pastors New Life City Church along with his son Johnny.
And I think that many Americans looking on would believe that we reached peace in this country. We never really got there. There is a semblance of peace, but peace does not really exist.
Parts of Belfast today are still racked by violence, drug abuse, and broken families. Members of Protestant and Catholic paramilitary groups have morphed into gangs, running drugs and protection rackets, and killing anyone who gets in their way. This church, in an old warehouse, sits like a fortress in the middle of it all.
It's one thing to preach peace and reconciliation. It's another thing to put your church on the borderline between forces that want to kill each other.
I don't think there is a building quite like this in the world. Where you have had two opposing communities, two opposing people groups that have literally killed each other by the thousands.
Most joined the fighting as teenagers and spent the prime of their lives in prison. Oso murdered a man before he was 18.
I came across a group of men who had two Roman Catholics up against the wall. They asked me had I got a gun. And I says, no, I don't have a gun, but I can get one. As they said that, one of the Catholic guys ran away. So I took the other guy and I took him away. I set myself up as judge, jury and executioner, and I took that young man's life.
Today, Pastor Jack and former paramilitary members of his church carry the cross down the middle of the Shankill Road in what was once a war zone in Belfast, lifting the cross as the only hope for this divided community.
I carried the cross today because I come from a republic in West Belfast. And today is my personal token of reconciliation to the Unionist, Loyalist community. And to literally raise that cross above that gun.
And for to carry the cross down the Shankill Road, where I used to be a paramilitary commander, a UVF commander, now to be a Christian.
You've got Republicans who have been born again. You've got Protestants who have been born again. So the significance of the cross is that the cross is for everybody in Ulster or Ireland. That here was a man that died on the cross for the sins of everyone. And it was a great opportunity to walk around through both communities and to lift his name above every other name.
As far as I'm concerned, a terrorist is a terrorist. And for the Holy Spirit to break into that is something that is supernatural. And yet we've seen that happen so many times, even here in Belfast.
Jack McKee has been threatened with death more than once for taking a leading role in trying to stop the violence in Belfast.
I know that I am the most hated pastor in this community, possibly in Northern Ireland. I don't know any other pastor in this country who's been sentenced to death or had more death attempts on them than I have. And I'm not overstating that.
He's written a book called What Does It Take?
And it's simply asking the question, what does it take in order to move communities away from division? The church has the answer to that.
New Life City Church opens its doors to the community daily with a soccer field, a coffee shop, and programs for those who need help.
This community needed another church, but not just another church.
It's only through the grace of God and what He is doing. There's very often things that take place within this building that we never orchestrated, that we never planned, that we never purposed, but it just happens.
I stand back sometimes and I say, this is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And I just get amazed when I see people coming to faith in Jesus at any time, but knowing they come from a terrorist background and that they're able to come and sit in the same row from those who were on the opposite side and worship God alongside them. Only God could have done that.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, Belfast.
Still ahead, we read their writings every time we open the Bible, but hear what it was like to be an apostle during the growth of the first century church when we come back. 2,000 years ago, a small group of men spreading the message of a little-known preacher changed the world. They were jailed, beaten, and sometimes put to death. Yet the faith continued to grow. In his new book, Jesus is Risen, David Limbaugh explores why so many risk their lives to follow Jesus. He sat down with our Paul Strand.
Christianity was persecuted from its beginning, with thousands of its earliest converts killed or jailed. So what made it so compelling that these early disciples were willing to die for it? In his new book, Jesus is Risen, David Limbaugh gives some reasons, like the fact that the disciples preached Jesus' resurrection right from the very start, that its worst persecutor, Paul, became its most fiery advocate, and that this new religion welcomed all mankind. Some say that the idea of Jesus' resurrection and divinity was added decades later, that the early apostles and believers didn't believe that. Tell me about that.
That's absurd on its face. Paul wrote in one of his letters, if Jesus Christ wasn't crucified, dead and buried, and then resurrected in his body, then Christians are the most to be pitied, because we've lived all our lives devoted to Christ and it's all a myth. His bodily resurrection is central to Christianity. His coming in history, his intervening in history as God and human, and dying and then being resurrected. And of course they believed it from the very first, which is why there was so much controversy. One of the main reasons there was controversy. The truth is the gospel was always as the gospel is today.
I know at the start that they were mostly preaching to Jews, but tell us about the first Gentile who was converted.
Cornelius was a Roman centurion who wasn't steeped in the Jewish law, and he was it was a cold call, so to speak. But God gave Peter a vision that from a carpet coming down with unclean animals, and eat these, God said in the vision, or the angel. And Peter said, I can't eat those unclean. So then he arranges for Cornelius, who also had a vision, to meet, make a long story short, and Peter ends up converting Cornelius and his family through faith in Jesus Christ. There's no one different. All are the same under Christ. No Jew, no Gentile, no Greek, no slave, no free person. We're all one in Christianity. And that vision of the unclean animals was to let him know God makes nothing unclean. This is a new covenant now. We're all able to come together and be saved through Jesus Christ.
Your book is about the book of Acts and the first 6 letters that Paul wrote. Do you find in there that a message that anybody is so evil, so unreachable, so bad that they cannot be saved?
No, Paul was an Orthodox Jew, and he was the most unlikely person to be saved, but he was confronted by Christ on the Damascus Road and converted personally by Christ. Why are you persecuting me? Not why are you persecuting the church. Persecution of the church was persecution of Jesus Christ, and he personalized it for Paul. And so he converted Paul to be the lead evangelist to the Gentiles, but he chose Paul because he was so passionate and such an ardent, sincere person and so relentless. And so he took and he spread the gospel, forming and planting all these churches. But no one is beyond the love of Jesus Christ unless they place themselves away from it, unless they outright rebel and reject him. But that's a matter of volition. I believe in free will. But he has opened himself up to anyone. You knock and I'll open the door. Seek and you shall find.
Could you say Paul's most effective techniques and arguments for making converts to the faith? What would you say was his best?
His main thing was he would take people as he found them. He would not sweat the small stuff. Around Jews, he would adopt Jewish practices, but he would never betray his faith. Do whatever made people comfortable so he could evangelize. It's kind of like Ravi Zacharias says, know the questioner as well as the question. Understand who you're talking to. Don't be a scold. Don't be a legalist. Try to relate to them on their own terms and then give them the truth about the God of the universe, the Savior, Jesus Christ, because that's a universal language we can all understand regardless of our cultures.
And you can purchase copies of David Limbaugh's book, Jesus is Risen, wherever you purchase your books. There's much more CBN Newswatch coming up right after this. A Texas teenager says God saved her life after she was shot while praying in her home near Houston. 17-year-old Kimberly Mendoza told ABC 13 she had just knelt down for her nightly prayer when a bullet shot through the wall behind her and grazed her arm. The news outlet reports the bullet barely missed the back of her head. Mendoza says she was praying for God to give her strength when the bullet hit her arm. They believe that someone fired the bullet.
Daddy's so great. He loved me, I know.
They believe someone fired the bullet from a nearby apartment complex. Mendoza praised God for her protection. First responders took Mendoza to the hospital and treated her injury. They say no arrests have been made, but if she had not been kneeling, that situation could have been a whole lot worse. Well, today is Veterans Day, and veterans, of course, begin that journey in boot camp. Right here on the CBN News Channel, you can follow the stories of 4 young recruits as they undergo training to become sailors in the United States Navy. Be sure to stay tuned throughout the day for the Veterans Day documentary, Making of a Sailor. It will air at 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 9 p.m. Right now, it is time for your Monday Motivation, and today I want to leave you with this message. In God, there is no failure. Your failures are actually only lessons that will lead to blessings. With that word, be sure to make this a marvelous Monday. That will do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember that you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Once again, make it a marvelous Monday and have a wonderful rest of the week.